name's Jeff, and this is Brittany. We're here from Scales Nature Park in Aurelia to talk about the Reptiles at Risk on the Road program. So Scales Nature Park is a product of Jeff Hathaway and Jenny Pierce. They've been doing reptile outreach for about 20 years now. And they've been doing it for most of that time with Science-Fictional Snakes, which is a program that's only about outreach. So they go to classes and libraries and parks and stuff and do programs on native Ontario, native Canadian reptiles and amphibians. And about 10 years ago, it was decided that they should open up a public facility as well. And that is Scales Nature Park. So Scales is based in Aurelia. We're going into our 4th year of being open to the public. We have the largest collection of native Canadian reptiles anywhere else in the country. Most of the big name groups like Little Rays and Reptilia, Indian River, they focus on the big, exciting, exotic stuff, like the python, cobras and the crocodiles and stuff like that. We like to focus on native Canadian stuff. So the Reptiles at Risk project began in 2006, and every year it goes to different parts of the province and sometimes over the rest of the country as well. This past year we were from Sudbury south to about Barrie, and then Owen Sound east to about Peterborough. And then we also did a very busy week down in southwestern Ontario as well. In other years, we've gone further north, all the way up to Cochrane and Moose Factory, and out to Vancouver Island, and out to Halifax, and Cape Breton Island, I think, as well. So when we go out to do one of these programs, we bring animals, we try and bring, for the most part, animals that can be found in that particular area. So if we were to come to do an actual Reptiles at Risk program here, we would not bring, for example, a fox snake because they don't live anywhere near here. But we would bring black rat snakes because they can be found, I think they can be found in Quebec and also down around Kingston, which is not terribly far away. We brought both of those species with us today, just in case anyone's interested. And the program has also been proven to be effective in improving kids and adults' knowledge and attitudes towards reptiles. So we'll send a survey to the school a couple of days beforehand before we come to do the programs, and then we'll send another survey the day after, and there's a marked improvement in kids' knowledge and attitudes about reptiles and amphibians. So this is what a typical program looks like. That's our boss, Jeff Hathaway. Looks like he's holding a black rat snake, although the picture's not very good. This is in Killbear Provincial Park, just north of Parry Sound. And yeah, what usually involves 2 people, and we switch off animals. Like we each take an animal, and then the next person will do another animal, and so on and so forth. So the funding for this comes from Ministry of Natural Resources for the most part. We also get funding from the federal government and from NSERC, which and the project is in partnership with Laurentian and with CARCNet, which is the Canadian Amphibian and Reptile Conservation Network. It's the biggest herpetofauna conservation network in the country. And with Science-Fictional Snakes, which is now, once again, its own separate organization. They're based in Guelph. And they do outreach, and Scales is, for the most part, just the public facility, but we will do the outreach programs through Reptiles at Risk only, for the most part. So what do we do with Ontario and Canadian reptiles? Because nobody knows anything about them. I mean, how many turtle species do you guys know of that live in Ontario? No? Anyone have a guess?
Whoa! Hold on.
Can anyone name?
Just on the website, that's all.
Oh yeah? Okay. Can you name any of them?
No.
No?
I saved the file.
Right. And therein lies the problem, is that people are learning about the big dramatic species that live in other parts of the world, pandas, tigers, which are really interesting animals, but there isn't really a whole lot that a kid in Ontario can do to directly help these animals, whereas a kid in Ontario can help a turtle to cross the road and save that turtle. So if they know more about the animals that live in their backyards, they're more inclined to help them and care about them. So a typical Reptiles at Risk program will start off with an introduction, telling the class or the campers or whatever about what the program is going to entail. We ask them to hold on to their questions until the end of the presentation part, because it makes the program run a lot smoother, and we often answer their questions as we go along anyway. And then we will bring out the first animal, and how that works is we will talk about the animal itself. The first animal is traditionally a garter snake. Talk about the animal itself, and then use each different animal for a lesson on general reptile biology. So the garter snake, we talk about cold-bloodedness and how that affects the snake, and then we don't actually like that term all that much because it has a nasty connotation with it as well, cold-blooded killers and scary things like that. So we teach them the proper scientific term, which is ectotherm, and then we'll go through that word a little bit with them to help them remember it and understand it. So we break it in half. Ecto means from outside. Therm means temperature, just like thermometer. Link it to something that they already know. And then we'll also use the garter snake to talk about how snakes are not in fact slimy. They are cleaner and drier than people are. So nobody gets to use sliminess as an excuse not to touch them later. And then we bring up the water snake. We talk a little bit about the water snake itself, and then we use that species to talk about snake senses, how they have terrible eyesight and are pretty much deaf. They have excellent senses of smell. And then so on and so forth through the rest of the native snakes that we brought, and then we'll go on to other reptiles, which we try and get the kids to tell us, can you guys name another type of reptile? And we go through the 3 other major groups of reptiles, and then we go on to turtles. We usually bring 2 turtles with us. And then we wrap up with corn snakes, which are not native to Ontario. So if anyone is thinking about getting a reptile as a pet afterwards, we don't actually endorse reptiles as pets, but we say, if you absolutely have to, corn snakes are a good one to start with. They stay small, they're easy to take care of, they're very docile, they're very colorful. There's like 300 different color varieties of corn snake. So now we're going to do a demonstration of a Reptiles at Risk program, part of one anyway. Brittany and I are going to switch off.
Good, just to give you an idea of what our program is actually sort of like, and of course to introduce you to some of our animals, which is maybe one of the more exciting aspects of us being here today. Start off by talking about a lovely eastern milk snake, and if you would like, you can hold on to her. You can pass her around. This, I believe, is a stablo, although of course they don't know their names because they're deaf. They can't hear things, and much as we love snakes, they're not terribly intelligent creatures. Actually, that's one of the reasons why I like them, because they're not that smart. But milk snakes, as a lovely PowerPoint presentation tells you, you can identify them by a Y-shaped mark that they tend to have on their head. So if you look closely at a stablo's head, you'll see kind of a Y on there. That's one good way to identify them. And also, the ones that are found around here, the eastern milk snake, they have big brown blotches going all down their backs. So some identifying factors. And milk snake, the name itself is horrendous. We go into this when we do our programs. The name milk snake is a terrible misnomer, because snakes have nothing to do with milk. So a bad name. But they got their name because way back in the day when people didn't know that much about snakes, they would find their snakes in barns. Of course, the other animal that they had in barns were cows, and so everybody naturally assumed that even though cows didn't live here throughout most of the history of North America, clearly the snakes were there to steal milk from the cows. So that little snake, a stablo, she's still young. She'll get a little bit bigger than that. She'll get to be about 4 feet long when she's fully grown. But even a 4-foot long milk snake is not going to crawl up a cow's leg and steal milk from it. It's absurd. But people believe this, so they called them milk snakes. And as a result, unfortunately as well, these snakes were somewhat persecuted by people like farmers because, of course, they needed to keep their milk as part of their livelihood. Although realistically, these snakes are excellent to have around farms because they are excellent mousers. And that's generally why they're around barns, because you find a lot of mice there. So they're actually really beneficial to farmers in the long run. And as well, milk snakes, all milk snakes, not just the eastern one, they will eat other snakes, which is kind of a neat fact, including rattlesnakes. And the eastern milk snake is found pretty much all across southern Ontario. And they are a threatened species, but I mean, habitat loss, of course, plays into one of the reasons why they're threatened. But one of the big reasons why they're not doing as well as they could be doing has to potentially do with human persecution. Because if you come across an eastern milk snake in the wild, they don't really have many ways to defend themselves. Snakes can't really protect themselves very well. So one thing this snake will do is it will vibrate its tail. It'll shake its tail around and leaves it in dirt, make lots of noise, try and sound much scarier than it actually is, which is a lot like another kind of snake that people are generally very afraid of. So milk snakes, they try and sound like a rattlesnake. And they're not venomous. We wouldn't be passing this around. Although we get questions all the time, like as we're passing it to 6-year-olds, is this poisonous? No, they're not. Also, snakes are venomous, not poisonous. Fact of the day, if you take anything from this presentation, please take away. Snakes are venomous, not poisonous. If you eat them, they're fine, it won't hurt you. But whole other topic, talk about that later. It's really a pet peeve of mine. But this snake will vibrate its tail to sound like the only venomous species of snake that we have here in the province of Ontario, which is the eastern Massasauga, although you can only find the eastern Massasauga in very specific places. You can only find them up in the Georgian Bay, Bruce Peninsula area. Surprisingly, in the city of Windsor, there's a tiny population, and also in another very small space in sort of southeastern Ontario called Wainfleet Bog. But most of Ontario, you can't find an eastern Massasauga. And we go into this during our programs because we want people to understand that even though you should absolutely be wary of a rattlesnake, you shouldn't go and pick it up in the wild if you find one, we want to stress that they're not dangerous animals if you know how to behave around them. Because if you leave a rattlesnake alone, it's not going to chase you, it's not going to try and hunt you down. They are terrified of us. We're the big scary creatures, we're the monsters out in the forest. So rattlesnakes, pretty much the only time they will ever bite you is if you accidentally step on them, which happens to people sometimes. And really, there's no one at fault in that situation. Or if you try and harass them and bother them by picking them up. In fact, a lot of the people that get bitten every year in the province of Ontario, which is usually only 6 to 8 people each year on average, a lot of those people are trying to pick them up. You see a lot of bites on hands, and surprisingly as well, a few on occasion on the backs of people's necks. It's because people pick them up and try and fling them. But ultimately, if they just left the snake alone, they would have been fine. Nothing bad would have happened. And our Massasauga as well has only ever killed 2 people in the history of all that we know of, and neither of those people went to a hospital. So really, our one rattlesnake, not that dangerous. Be wary around them, but you don't have to be scared of them. And that's ultimately the message that we try to get across when we're talking to kids about these snakes.
So did you say these ones eat other snakes?
They sure do. That is why this one travels alone. Because if we put 2 milk snakes in a bag, we might only get one in the bag.
Like what size of snake would they eat compared to themselves?
I have seen, I just talked about this with my boss not too long ago, a snake eating a snake bigger than itself. There was an x-ray, and the snake that was eaten was kind of zigzagged in the smaller snake. Not typical. Normally they only eat things a bit smaller than themselves, but possible for a smaller snake to eat one that's bigger than itself.
How does it kill the other snake if it's not venomous?
Constriction.
Okay, so it actually takes the time to go around
Yeah.
compared to the other snake.
Or it could just eat it live, and then the poor snake that gets eaten dies a slow, awful death.
Okay, because it just, is it like the stronger snake wins? Or the, you know what I mean? Because if they're both gonna try to wrap each other around, like how does this take place?
I once was trying to feed some corn snakes, and I was dangling the mouse in front of, we don't feed live, these are, mice are dead. So and then one of the quarter snakes like whipped up and tried to bite the mouse but missed.